No time is a good time to say goodbye to you. No place has a right pace to say what I need to get out. Can't say it straight to your face, but I had to leave this state of grace. And I ask you right to the sunnier side, to the merrier side of your dream, the greener side of the stream. And you're there with me, and I'll be waiting for you by the sea. Come and ride with me, come and ride. Oh, I'm tied up, and I'm tied down, too tired to keep up the fight. Soothing would be a sign.
Hey Drax, can you hear me?
We have this one shot.
Okay, sometimes your audio breaks up, so I'll try to pick up. If I can't understand, I may have to have you repeat.
But I had to leave this state of grace. And I ask you right to the sunnier side, to the merrier side of your dream, the greener side of the stream. And you're there with me, and I'll be waiting for you by the sea. Come and ride with me, come and ride. Come and
Well, hello there, and welcome to the Drax Files Radio Hour without Joe Yardley. I'm gonna go to VR because I'm in the basement, and with me today on the Drax Files Radio Hour, Sansar Live Edition, is Kent By. Hello, Kent.
Hey Drax, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
And before I properly introduce you, in case you're watching this on YouTube and you say, well, I know this basement, it's Drax's 115 Harvest experience, I'm going to go in there and I want to hang out with them. We are on a locked set because we need to control a little bit the quote-unquote chaos that may ensue if people just come in here and, and hog the bandwidth, basically. So Kent By, I'm going to go switch in and out of VR, by the way, and I'm going to focus the camera on Kent and me. Galen, who people in Sansar know, created a wonderful camera switching system, but we're not going to use it today. We're going to use it next time. There's a few little kinks to work out. Kent By, if you do not know him, he is running the Voices of VR blog and podcast. It's a podcast, sorry, Kent. And you have recorded over 600 interviews with the makers and shakers in the VR field, in digital culture as a whole, you have now, because that doesn't keep you busy enough, you also created the Voices of AI podcast. I don't know how many episodes there are, like 100 or something.
Well, so I've recorded about 800 episodes of Voices of VR and published about 628 of those now, and I've recorded about 90 or 100 episodes of Voices of AI and published about 5 of them so far. So if you remember, actually, you were one of my first batch of interviews at the Silicon Valley Virtuality Conference in 2014. I did I think 46 interviews in that
Yes.
day and a half, and I think you were episode number 47. So, I was aware of your work, and I think I approached you and sort of talked to you about Second Life.
Yeah, and you also, I think Ebbe is on there too. Ebbe Altberg, CEO of Linden Lab, and a whole bunch of people. I mean, it's really an amazing body of work that you have amassed. Have you thought? Have you really kind of? Because when I met you, I seriously, the first thought that I was like, wow, you're really good at this, but you're going to shoot yourself in the foot if you want to do like an interview a day, because I've been in radio a long time ago, and I thought, like, I had those same aspirations, and then after a while I just wanted to jump off my building.
Well, so the first, eventually I was doing like 5 episodes a week. And then I cut back, but the problem when cutting back is now I have like over 200 episodes in my backlog. So, there's this weird, like the longer I wait, the more, sort of, it's like information, it goes stale after a while. So that's a challenge of like going and covering stuff. It's changing so quickly that I actually have the capacity to do like 20 to 40 interviews over the course of a conference. But then if I put it out, it just depends on how much I put out. So I would say last year, I just really wanted to cover what was happening in the VR industry, despite the fact of not being able to put them all out as quickly as I can. So I'm still continuing to do VR coverage. And then I hope to eventually amp up to get back up to those 5 episodes a week on top of launching the Voices of AI, which is also kind of diving into a whole other industry. And I've got a couple other podcasts as well that I hope to dive into math and philosophy and a little bit more into, consciousness and archetypal realities as well. So, but the ones that have launched right now, Voices of VR, Voices of AI. And so I've been really looking at the ultimate potential of both virtual reality as well as now artificial intelligence.
And that's the name of your upcoming book, The Ultimate Potential of VR. So what I want to talk about, I mean, there's so much to talk about. So today we have about an hour, and then we will go out, maybe meet some fans and sign some autographs. I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to go out of this locked basement. It was funny because Ebbe was in here last time, and he just wanted to TP out. They said, Ebbe, you got to properly walk outside. Don't break presents. Walk up the stairs, walk through the door. Of course, I was kidding a little bit because the door is actually locked because, again, this is just sort of a replica of the basement. Now, Kent, we did a quick test here in Sansar. You've been in Sansar before, and when you came in and we did the test a few days ago, you pointed out something interesting, which may lead us right away into the topic of presence. So you came in here into my little podcast studio, and you pointed out that the microphones are too high, and basically they obscure the setup. Kind of obscures the visual, the eye line between me, the interviewer, and you, the guest. And how did that make you feel, Kent? Let me be honest.
So there's a couple of things that I think that's worth sort of pointing out. So first of all, this table was about a foot higher, and so when I was standing here, it was like the equivalent of like me being behind this thing, and I couldn't see it. So that was sort of like we are in VR, so there's the question of like what kind of VR spaces can you design to really maximize the level of connection that you have. So for whatever reason, you've decided to put this table in between us, which in some ways creates this barrier. So there's this challenge of skeuomorphic design versus like actually using the unique affordances of doing types of design that you could never actually do in real reality. This is more of a skeuomorphic design where you actually a very strong embodied experience of this is like replicating a setup that you've been a part of for a long time. So it's actually invoking these principles of embodied cognition such that for you it may actually get you deeper into that mindset of being connected into this context of an interview. Now, for me, that was
That's
also
right. Sorry to
doing that.
because that was exactly really the initial goal, because I don't see this as an obstacle. I see this is comforting me personally, because it reminds me of sort of a setup that we had at the public radio station. I go like, if I were to build something like for a group of people, just sit around a table, we need places to put like notes, we need places to put like a phone, which has no receiver, as I can see somewhere on the ground. We'll talk about that later. And coffee cups and so on and so forth. So yeah, you're right. I completely understand your point of view. But for me, this creates, as it creates discomfort in you, it creates comfort in me. And here maybe we're at the conundrum of VR and perception and all.
So the other thing that I was bringing up the other day, but I'll sort of bring up here, is that there's a pop filter that's here on this microphone, but yet I should be standing here to use this sort of virtual pop filter, which actually isn't hooked up to anything. But when I do that, it actually it occludes my view of you and actually makes it a worse experience than me standing right here, where I can see you without any occlusion. Mm-hmm. So you've actually created a system in a room that has this trade-off between skeuomorphism and what would actually be better for us as a conversation. So these are, I think, sort of interesting questions of that. This actually microphone standing here with a pop filter being wrong actually breaks my presence in a weird way. So because I would expect it to be right here if it was sort of trying to do a skeuomorphic design. So actually there's like this uncanny valley of creating this world that is off. And because I'm like a little bit more of an audio geek, it actually breaks my expectations of what it should be.
Mm-hmm. Very good point. But and again, I'm not dismissing it, because you said like you're the audio geek and everybody has a very sort of specific area where they may be a little bit too obsessive for their own good. But you're absolutely correct. And I will have Ria, who created these microphones with the pop filter, I really have to call her and be very angry with her. No, but this leads me to something with the presence, and we have this discussion every time we meet, because as people know, I come from Second Life, and Second Life is my home. I love Sansar, but I still feel like I'm only visiting here and these other worlds, and I like to be in Second Life for many reasons. Now, you have such a problem with these little things, and again, I'm not dismissing your point.
Well, hold on. Let me just. It's not about problem. It's about expectations.
Right.
So presence, like in order for you to cultivate the sense of presence, you have to match whatever the user expectations is, and user expectations will be widely varying and different. But that's sort of like the dimension of mental presence that I would say, and there's many different flavors, I would say, of presence, where there's mental presence, there's social presence, there's active presence where you're actually engaging and interacting with objects, there's embodied presence, so you actually feel like you're in your body, and then there's emotional presence, which is the degree to which your emotions are being engaged within an experience. And so the expectations of creating a room that's coherent, it sort of goes into this mental presence where if there's things off, then that can break mental presence. But I can have very great social presence with you, despite the fact there's these inconsistencies that are breaking my mental presence. But I can still have amazing social presence with you.
That's great, and that's exactly my question. And it takes me I think a very long time to to coherently phrase them. And people go like, Drax, come on, move on. By the way, Kelvin Olsen, who is watching on YouTube, says if Ken could move his mic back just a bit, blasting occasionally. So I don't know if you, Kelvin, if you want Ken to move back physically. He just gave away that these virtual mics are not even hooked up to anything. You broke my presence, Ken.
I'm in my Vive headset, so this is something like. Okay, well, I another recording I could hear that it was peaking. So anyway, that's something that I'll have to work out and come up with a much. Well, part of the problem, I think, actually, that's a good point, because I'm able to like move around like this, but once I put a microphone in my real actual reality, that constrains my way of looking, and then I have to break presence in order to actually move. Yeah. So it's a little bit of like I have to figure out a better, either it's like a wireless mic solution or something that doesn't use the constraints of this sort of Vive headset and microphone that I'm using right now.
Well, then I would say let's go to the Mel Slater interview that you did, because I listened to it just before the show, and you had a dispute a little bit, or not a dispute, but I think you saw things differently, or was surprising to you when you interviewed him that you saw things differently. And as I was listening to him, Mel Slater, by the way, is well-known researcher at the University of Barcelona. I know about him because Nuni de la Peña, the godmother of VR, told me when she worked with him, and he actually built an experiment where you become a prisoner in Guantanamo. And Noni did, of course, the Second Life Guantanamo replica, where you're also thrown into a prison. But Mel Slater had this in a more sophisticated way, where you actually embody that prisoner. So, Kent, if you could set up what
Sure.
you understood with the Mel Slater interview, because it is about presence, and I think the dispute was, or what threw you off maybe, and me too, is that Mel looks at presence in an incredibly narrow way, which I personally think is way too narrow. And then when we talk about that, then I will bring up Second Life, because the presence that I and other people feel in Second Life, the general public cannot understand why there's a screen in between you. And sort of Mel, and again, no offense, but Mel seems to dismiss that as not valid. But Kent, take it away.
Sure. Well, so first I want to say that part of the reason why I started the podcast in the first place was because the academic conference of the IEEE, that's the Institute for Electronic and Electrical Engineers, they have a VR conference every year, which is kind of like the biggest conference. There was basically no coverage of it back in 2014. So then that was part of the reason why I started my podcast, because I did some phone calls with people to see what was being covered in the academic world. And then I eventually went to France in 2015 to cover the IEEE VR. And I've covered it for the last 3 years. I'm not unfortunately going to be able to go this year because it's in conflict with GDC. But you have academia, which a lot of people might consider sort of old VR. And then you have consumer VR, which is new VR. And in a lot of ways, these two realms have been independently sort of operating, and there's not a lot of bridges. And I think the work that I've been doing with the podcast is trying to make these bridges between the academic world and the sort of more consumer VR. So with that said, Mel Slater is at the University of Barcelona, and I think also maybe somehow with the University of College London, but he is looking at embodiment. So he is very concerned about all the different ways that VR kind of hacks all of your sensory motor contingencies, right? So he's done some VR research, but I think after I did these interviews, he sort of said, well, I'm not really like, that's not my main focus of presence, but he does have this theory of presence that describes two illusions that describes the nature of what he considers, what I would consider embodied presence, and what he considers like the illusions of VR, which is the place illusion and the plausibility illusion. So the place illusion is just that we're in another place and I feel like I'm in this basement right now and this is real. And then the plausibility illusion is what we were talking about earlier, which is like everything is coherent and it feels like it's plausible. Now this sort of like disconnect between this pop filter, you know, because I can't move it, it breaks that plausibility for me. And so but for Mel,
but
he is
still
looking
here.
at,
So let me just parse it real quick. So you can chew and walk and chew gum at the same time, meaning you feel like you're here, but there's a little bit less plausibility because of these inconsistencies, including
exactly.
the phone as well.
Right.
The receiver is hovering somewhere.
Right. And the place illusion is something that's mostly from the VR affordances. So having a good frame rate, low latency, all these things are more technical to be able to actually trick your perceptual system into believing that you're into another place. Now, the plausibility illusion actually is a lot more sensitive. It's more like akin to a house of cards, that once you break the illusion of plausibility, it's very hard to get that back. It'd be kind of like watching a movie and they have a plot hole that you're just like, oh man, I don't believe that would actually happen. And then it kind of takes you out of the sort of suspension of disbelief as you're watching a movie. And it's very similar to what happens in VR, is that you believe that something's real, but as soon as something sort of kind of breaks the illusion, then it's harder to get back into that illusion. So I think if I were to summarize the debate that I had with Mel Slater, it was like he had a very narrow way of looking at the place illusion and plausibility illusion in terms of embodied presence. And then I would hear this theory, but then I would go out and I have this dimension of social presence right now. Like I feel like I'm with you and talking to you. Or I would watch a movie or a cinematic experience in VR and be very emotionally moved. Like Pearl, for example, is a great example of an emotional presence within a VR experience. And also active presence. So in video games, like in Job Simulator, I feel like I'm actually like moving things around. And so I felt like there was these other completely different dimensions of presence that I was like, well, how does Mel like resolve this? And what was surprising to me was that he really doesn't, and he's not concerned about that.
Yeah.
He's only concerned about embodied presence and what are the things that you can do within the technological hardware that can be objectively controlled to be able to trick your sensory motor contingencies in order to believe that you're actually present in the world.
Right. So
that's what I would
really looking at the data. He's trying to collect data that is tied to technological devices in order to find sort of a formula or where it sort of shifts between the presence and the non-presence. And I found that to be incredibly reductive, and I was really glad that you were pushing back that there's all these other levels and nuances of actually feeling present.
Well, I think that.
I mean,
so
again, I'm sorry interrupting. One more thing, because again, I mean, this is what we're leading up to. You know, when I talk to people in Second Life again, which is mediated by the screen, which a lot of people would dismiss as okay, how can you feel present there because there's a screen between you and the phone is ringing and I don't know the plumber is right there and he's asking you questions. How can you feel that you're actually in this experience when you're not embodied with 6 degrees of freedom? And the answer that most people give is because I identify so wholly with this avatar that I'm sending forth into the world that it kind of creates the suspension of disbelief that all this other stuff is almost irrelevant. Now, everybody knows that doesn't work for everybody, but anyways, long diatribe continues.
Yeah, well, no. So so one of the things that Mel says in the interview is that NASA Stephen Ellis said that any good sort of theory of presence would have what are essentially trade-offs, or being able to do, like, if you raise one thing, you're lowering another thing. So there's these kind of, like, as a design framework, as an engineer, you always have trade-offs for all sorts of stuff. So if you have a framework that's to be able to do that. But what I would say about Mel's theory of presence is that it's only focused on embodied presence of your sensory input of all the different things that are going to, like, kind of dial in that sense of being, like, all of your senses tricked and hacked. So, but I would sort of take it back and say, well, I think it's just more than embodied presence. I think there is an emotional component, there is a social component, there is an active component, and so for me, I think of my theory of presence is more of like an experiential design framework. So in academia, they're less concerned about telling a story or creating these social dynamics, and they really want to sort of reduce things down to things that they control so that they can, as you're building the hardware, you can make those trade-offs. But as experiential designers, it's much more like creating a story and creating an experience. And when you have those experiences, you have to do these trade-offs between social and mental presence, active presence, embodied presence, and emotional presence. And how are you going to, like, combine all these things and, like, basically mix them up as ingredients? And that, to me, is what I would say is the fundamental components of an experience.
Mm-hmm. I tend to agree. I found again, I mean, he's not here to defend himself as we're trashing an academic here, but
well, I wouldn't say it was trashing. I just, what he would say is that we would just had different theories, and I think it's right. His theory is just looking at one specific thing, and my theory is trying to look at something much broader and more holistic in that way.
Right. He thinks of you as sort of I don't know, you're sort of meditating in Big Sur and I don't know, smoking a doobie, and he's there and looking at the numbers. That's what he's thinking.
I think this is, well, here's the thing. I think in academia, you have to be able to reduce things down to things that you can control. And it is a bit of a quantification. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's actually an interesting question in terms of, like, as we move forward, how much is the academic world going to be continuing to be able to reduce things down to numbers and give insights into these things? And how much of the innovation is going to be driven by people actually experimenting with creating a holistic experiences that are tightly integrated? And so I think it's a deeper question about, like, how does the academic approach to VR versus sort of the more pragmatic experiential design and creation of VR, how are those two worlds going to, like, actually interface and interact going forward? And I think that's a big question that nobody has, like, a really great answer to yet. Yeah. But I think it gets to the there's underlying philosophies of what reality is and what's important. And I think the values of what's important is just different between academia and what people who are building experiences are.
Also, the platform providers. I mean, I would go a step further because there's a third constituency, if you will. I mean, if you want to divide it that way, there's academia, there's the platform providers, and then there's what people call the user. I don't like that term. I like to because I like the idea of democratizing content creation, and I do believe that everybody has a creative streak, as Philip Rosedale used to say when he was promoting Second Life in the 2006 era. That is just sort of a dormant muscle that you have to learn to flex again. And having said that, now this would interest me because this week you're totally like on a social VR tour. Now, what is your sense of social VR? Wait, first question. How do you like Sansar? It's like, you're coming to my town, Munich or Pacific Grove, where I used to live, or Honolulu. So you're visiting me, and then of course I'll ask you, how do you like it? And then of course you're a nice guy. You're gonna say a couple nice things, but then after a couple of beers, you're gonna say some. You're gonna be maybe with a little critique. So lay it all out there. What do you think of Sansar? And again, you said last time when we tested it, you are basically the noob who looks at it and needs to be honest about how do people who just come in now, fresh, how do they perceive it? So your first impressions.
Well, so
good and bad and
first,
ugly.
I think that the worlds look absolutely beautiful, and I think that you have like a couple of different philosophies of how social VR companies are sort of proceeding. So the centralized versions of VR Chat as well as Sansar are having things that they're hosting it, they're taking care of all of it, and you're able to have like a higher fidelity of an experience in that way. Something like high fidelity is something that is just completely decentralizing things and kind of putting a lot of the burden on the individuals to be able to stand up their own hosting service, and so it's actually taking a lot longer for that to kind of get stood up in that way. They're also doing a much more open web approach of using like JavaScript as their primary framework, rather than something that is native code with both Sansar and VR Chat. And so what I would say about like my experiences is that I think VR Chat, part of their reason for why they've been so successful is that they've had, and I did an interview actually with VR Chat at the Silicon Valley Virtual Reality Conference in 2014. They've been around for, from almost the very beginnings of the advent of the consumer VR. Yeah. They're very kind of like one of the first social VR applications. There was another one that was more about the Rich Max Theater, but they sort of they're no longer around. So VR Chat from the very beginning has been all about empowering the user with the SDK in Unity, so that you could create something in Unity and just sort of upload it into the world, and as well having like very easy control to be able to like change and adapt your expression of your identity. And so like coming into Sansar right now, for example, so I only see, like, you see my body. I'm in a HTC Vive, and so I only see my floating blue hands in front of me right here. I don't see any sort of embodiment. And you were asking me, you were like, why are you using like a stock avatar? Right. And I noticed, like, when I go into VR Chat, there's actually a more of an emphasis of me having a unique avatar that shows my identity, because I can actually see my body, and I can see that other people have these sort of stock avatars. And so what I thought was interesting about, you were like, why are you in a stock avatar? Don't you want to be like me and have a unique expression of my identity? Well, I can't actually see my identity, and there's no mirrors around. And so there's less of an incentive there, but it's also more about how you are relating to me than it's how I'm relating to the world. And so I haven't spent enough time in Sansar to see a bunch of the default avatars running around to know that I'm sort of maybe considered a lower class when it comes to like the being able to navigate the technology. That said, go ahead.
This is fascinating. Really well put. Please hold that thought. I don't want to interrupt you, but I got to throw in this tiny little anecdote, and I'll be very brief, because you're putting the nail on the head in terms of that I am relating to you and you're not relating to yourself right now because you can't even see yourself. And I first of all, I want to say that you actually, I think this avatar is absolutely brilliant. If you watch this broadcast later, I think you'll say that, oh my God, this is totally me. And I've met you in the physical world, and I think like they have to rename this avatar with these glasses. They have to rename him in the carousel when pubes come in. That this is the Kent By signature.
But you had to send me these glasses. Like, you had to send me a link to get glasses that were for free. It would have taken me probably a lot longer to discover that there's a marketplace for free assets, and it would have taken me a lot longer to find these glasses. But out of the box, to go through the defaults. So I think anytime you're doing a VR application, you have to really consider what the default application, like the default sets are, because as a new user, I'm going to come in and kind of use it without doing like too much work to be able to overcome
I agree
like
with
the
you.
customization.
So when we're talking about strategy, I agree with you. I mean, ideally there would be like a place like when you log in, there would be maybe like a store. High Fidelity has something akin to that. I don't know if VR chat is so easy. Again, I mean, I'm not here to kind of judge one platform against the other. I'm not a propagandist or anything. I actually think that VR chat in the very beginning, they were I always admired them. Of course, now they blocked me on Twitter, which is unfortunate. I have nothing against them. I admire them. But so this is not solved.
There's also the user interface that you have to do outside of VR and the user face that you use inside of VR. So there's actually very, very little user interfaces for me to change my identity within VR. I have to go outside of VR to change all of that. And in fact, like when I click on the lookbook, it actually kicks me out of being able to even talk to you. So if I wanted to go change my avatar, I would have to take my headset off, go over to my computer, be able to stop talking to you, and then like click buttons, be offline for 2 to 3 minutes, and then come back online and come back with my new avatar. So it's not, and like, VR chat has all that seamless. Like, you could be talking there, you could pull up a menu and be able to change your avatar on the fly in the minute, and then you're kind of seamlessly have this experience where you're not, I mean that in some ways could be breaking presence, because all of a sudden I'm sort of transforming into another being, an entity, but at the same time I'm able to maintain that social presence with people in that continuity without having to break that sort of other mental presence.
I completely agree with you. These metaphors also with the teleport, the portal in VR chat, I completely agree with you, and I actually have said to Lindenlamp that they really need to look into these things. On that point, I agree with you. Tiny little anecdote about how important the avatar is. I mean, everybody thinks about that differently. I was doing a presentation on Second Life at Santa Clara University for the staff, because they had invested heavily. They rebuilt built their campus and world, so they needed to train the staff. There was a bunch of teachers who were really into Second Life, and there was a bunch of teachers who went to that tutorial that I gave and said, like, what is this BS? Like, what are we doing? Like, this is a video game. I want to teach real people, blah, blah, blah. There was an economics professor who was very, very reluctant and very antagonistic to me. I told these teachers, please now go to the store in Second Life, design an avatar, get your clothes, and everybody was really into it, right? So they were all like dressing up and stuff, and some people got really elaborate. Everybody got a little allowance, say they bought some cool stuff. This one guy was like, I'm gonna take the default guy. Oh yeah, he has no hair, I don't care. So he was all like Then we went on a little field trip in Second Life. Said, okay, I'm from Munich. Let's go to the replica of Munich, downtown Munich. We went into Second Life Munich. We're running around there on the Marienplatz, talking to people, looking around. 2007 was the time. I want to remind people. Now, this economics professor, accidentally, somebody approaches him, another avatar approaches him, and starts talking to him in Italian. Now, turns out that economics professor had studied in Italy, knows Italian. He strikes up a conversation in text with this other guy. They talk and they say, oh yeah, you're from this town, I remember this town, I studied there, blah, blah, blah. They strike up an instant friendship in this virtual world. And now, Kent, guess what happened next? They exchange emails. The economics professor gets off the computer, comes over to me and says, where can I get a decent suit and some good hair? Why? Because he related to another person, and the person judged him.
Well, so I didn't think about my avatar until you said, why are you using a default avatar? Don't you want to look beautiful like me or a unique expression of my identity? And you said, well,
unique. I didn't say beautiful. I just said,
You
you know
said
what I
unique.
said. Let me clarify. I just said because this is important because I mean, my son is differently too. It's a different generation. My son is a gamer. He can go into a game and he can, oh, this guy looks cool. Now I'm this guy in GTA and I'm this other guy in this other game, and I couldn't do that. Right? It would feel like I get a plastic surgery every time I go to a different country. So you explain this to me. You're the bridge between academia and consumers. Why am I like this, and why am I an outlier?
Well, I think so. What I would say is that everybody has like a temperamental balance between these types of things of whether or not they value them or not. So your expression of your having nice clothes or looking nice in the world, that could be something that is a part of your own personality. And so there's going to be a whole range of people that have different, they either dress up and to the nines every time they go walk out the door, or even if they don't walk out the door, they just want to be ready and look nice. And there's other people that don't put as much effort on that. And I think that's going to follow within VR. But the difference is that with the principle of embodied cognition, when you start to embody different characters, that can, the principle of embodied cognition says that you don't just use your brain to think, but you use your entire body. So when you're actually changing embodiments, then that's actually changing the way that you can think, especially how other people are responding to you. And so you have this kind of interface between embodying these different characters within virtual reality that is actually, not just sort of like, I guess it is very similar to putting on nice clothes and dressing up really nice. But I would say in VR, it has a potential that you can only do so much with your DNA that you've been given to change your identity of how you are physically being represented in the world.
That goes without question. I'm sorry to interrupt. It goes without question. It's the entire thing. That's why VR Chat to Second Lifers is actually exciting, because VR Chat is sort of like Second Life for people with headsets, with the fluency that, I'm not disputing. I think that's super important that we have this freedom to be whoever we are. My upcoming Our Digital Selves documentary, yes, I'm plugging myself every 10 minutes, is all about that people are basically dealt with a certain type of genes and DNA in the physical world, but what they represent, what they want to embody, how their soul wants to be sort of pushed outward, they can do with the avatar. So I'm not advocating at all to be nice or a certain type of person. I want complete freedom. And you put the nail on the head earlier, where you alluded to the fact that maybe there's a two-class system almost emerging, which I fear as well, where people go, oh, this dude is totally decked out, and look, he has these glasses and stuff like that, and this other guy is sort of off the shelf, from Target.
I think there's going to be a bit and I think that's been covered in different sci-fi conceptualizations of the future, is that there is going to be the people who have more access to resources in the real life are going to have access to technology that's going to give them either a higher immersive experience or higher fidelity control of how they can actually gesticulate and express themselves. So me being able to move my hands around like this gives me a higher power within social VR, because I can sort of command more attention with how I'm moving. And I think that's actually, it's interesting to see VR Chat, because VR Chat, and I think both actually Sansar and Fidelity are being built to be able to have a 2D interface. There's other experiences, I would say the Rec Room, for example, that is just built for VR. You really actually need to be in VR to use your full body and your interaction with the environment. It's a much harder experience to have an equivalent experience in Rec Room without your sense of embodiment than it is in some more of these social VR experiences. Yeah. So Rec Room is more centered on active presence, whereas both the social VR is more about social presence. So in both Sansar as well as Fidelity and VR Chat, you have this 2D screen. So when there's at its peak, maybe 20,000 concurrent users, maybe down to 7,000 or 6,000 concurrent users within VR Chat. A lot of those users are not even in VR. They're using a 2D interface, but they're able to get a similar social interaction, just like in Second Life, using a 2D screen that feels just as present and just as real, but it's just their sense of embodied presence isn't at that same level. And they see the difference of social, how people relate to people, but also their ability to fully express themselves. It's actually catalyzing a lot of people to actually build to get the full VR headset, so they can get their full body in the experience, so they can use their body to communicate a lot more.
That's and what I see as a problem, and it's a wonderful conversation, Kent. I just want to say that I'm enjoying this, and I enjoy all our conversations always, and how we're sort of floating back and forth. It's wonderful, and thank you again for coming here. I see the bigger problem right now, and it might be quite temporary. While Sansar High Fidelity VR Chat can be these leading social VR spaces can be used with or without a headset, which is wonderful. So it creates theoretically access and inclusion. On the other hand, in reality, it actually creates a two-tier system where not only the clothes signify that you are of sort of a higher status, the fact that you have VR makes you somewhat of a higher status. And for me, as an old commie socialist, I find that problematic. I don't know how to solve that problem, but I want to, your upcoming book is entitled The Ultimate Potential of VR. For me, the ultimate potential of VR is actually to create a level playing field like Philip Rosedale tried to do with Second Life, making it a place where people interact, and it creates a diverse society, and it creates all that wonderful hippie stuff of everybody getting along and engaging with creativity. And so, yeah, right now the status that we have is, and we see this at Atlas hopping every Saturday, and I'll try to make it a point that we don't exclude people because they're in that's, or we don't look down on them. A lot of people tell me, oh, I'm not going to come to Atlas hopping because I don't have a VR set. And then I tell them, wait a minute, Sansa works without. Just come along. Yeah, then I feel weird because others have it. So there's already that kind of, self-conscious, like cliquish type of thing. Yeah.
I think the inequality question is something that is on every dimension of society, and in technology.
Exactly.
And in technology, I think like there is some potential to sort of change that with new technology solutions like decentralized blockchain and stuff like that. But let me just sort of give a metaphor here for there's the power law distribution and dynamics that are in every sort of dimension of technology and market. And that's essentially saying that like 20% of the people control 80% of the resources. And like, why does that happen? And I think that in some ways there's sort of like an exponential curve when it comes to technology diffusion, but also like access to like resources and opportunities, so that once you get at a certain point, you just have much more sort of opportunities and resources, so that it has this power law dynamic that tends to happen every dimension of nature. So you can look at like, why does that happen and how do you counter it? And I think that you have the yin and the yang. The yang is the competition, and that's the things where you're trying to compete, and a zero-sum game, everybody wins. And the yin is much more cooperative. There's more equal exchange. There's more education, information. The more you give away of information, the more information you get. So you have some of these, but the more money you give away, the less money you get. So like information is more of a yin currency, and education is more of a yin currency, because the more educate, the more that you actually learn in the process of educating. But the more money you give away is actually more competition. And so the big question is, well, how do you create systems of society and technology that are able to actually balance the process of giving and receiving? And I think the blockchain represents an interesting sort of alternative to a lot of the market-based solutions, because you can donate your resources to be able to actually solve cryptographic puzzles, which help distribute trust and be able to counter the tendencies between centralization and decentralization. So if I were to like summarize the biggest challenge of technology, it's like you have the forces of centralization and walled gardens, and you have decentralization and sort of open platforms and open standards. And the centralization can actually provide a better user experience. So right now we're in Sansar and VR Chat. They're both centralized VR experiences, higher experience overall. The decentralized experience of something like High Fidelity is a lower experience, but yet it has the potential to be able to, over time, be able to pull in more collaborators, because there's more of an open source, open platform dynamic. So while both VR Chat and Sansar are like a higher experience, it could be over time that same exponential growth of that power law curve. Once it gets past that curve, there's more opportunities for people to participate. So it's the equivalent of the open web versus like CompuServe and AOL. If back in the day, like AOL and CompuServe were better, but then now over time, like I don't know of anybody who would rather have their sole experience of the internet be AOL or CompuServe versus what's available on the open web. So I think like moving forward, we have to like figure out how those two then.
Yeah, I gotta throw this in there. I'm not sure how open the web is with Facebook, Google, and a few other behemoths actually controlling it.
They are a centralizing force, right?
Exactly.
So they're a centralizing force. force that controls like over 80% of the ad market. So then you have all these other people who are decentralized in the regional newspapers that are basically like at the whims of these centralized forces. Exactly. So what I see is that there's a huge backlash against these centralized companies, and now they're trying to build structures and systems of decentralized cryptographic networks that can basically like counteract a lot of the bad aspects of those centralized experiences, especially if they're not humble enough to send back. Like, I think there's a model by which human beings, once they have enough resources, they can donate their time, they can send the elevator down to help people up. And so my big question is, well, what does that look like from a technological perspective? Like, for example, what if you were going to a website and just from the process of you going to that website in the back end, there was some sort of cryptographic currency that was paying that website to provide that experience and that content? So, you know, rather than having ads there, what if there's more of a subscription model? Or what if you're donating your GPU time to be able to like generate some different file coin so that you're using your resources to do that, so that when you want to have services, you can have more of an equal exchange based upon what information you have. So I think that...
Yeah.
So
I'm doing what I should never do, which is to be so excited about what you're saying, to jump in there, as my boss back in the radio days told me, don't do that, Drax, and I'm still doing it. You're absolutely spot on. The biggest problem that I see, and I see that backlash as well, which is very good, because I think the biggest problem is that it seems, and Jaron Lanier talked about that as well, is that the people with the most, the problem or the promise of breaking up old power structures has not really come to fruition, because the power is centralized, and people with the more computing power are more powerful. Just a couple of things. David Columbia, who I've booked on this show, is coming. He wrote a book, The Politics of Bitcoin, Software as Right-Wing Extremism. Very good. He differentiates between Bitcoin and blockchain quite a bit, and he's a proponent of blockchain, but not so much of Bitcoin. So guys, look up that book, look up David Columbia, Columbia on Twitter, @Columbia, and also want to transition into AI a little bit as we come to the top of the hour. Kathy O'Neill wrote an amazing book that I talk about all the time, Weapons of Math Destruction. She talks about predictive policing and all that. So Kent laid out all these wonderful possibilities that are at our fingertips, and I'm not a cynic. I'm an idealist, I think, like you are, but I'm really concerned that that we're just sort of replicating old power structures. And if you read Marx, or if you watch the upcoming movie, which is absolutely amazing, Young Marx by Raoul Peck, I think, nothing has really changed from when he described the theory of the tension between capital and labor. So,
well, I think the difference, though,
last sentence, we have the power to really kind of change that, but we really gotta take that quite seriously. Otherwise, it's just going to be the same old power structure replicated in the digital world.
So I think that there's politics with their basically interfacing with human behaviors and laws and rules, and then there's like technology, which are built upon open platforms, but basically you can put any sort of software on those networks as you want, and it becomes a matter of like, well, how do those two interface? How do the political system, is there a way to regulate our way out of this dynamic of these huge power law curve dynamics of centralized power? And I'm not sure that there is. I think that there could be, and I hold my mind open for that, but I don't think that politicians understand the technological questions well enough to know what kind of policies even make sense there. So then what are you left with? I think what you're left with is basically the market can decide, and you have what is essentially this theory of evolution from thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So you have the synthesis of like a new open platform with the web, and then you have the antithesis, which is eventually Facebook becomes some people's only experience of the World Wide Web, and that, they're no longer going out and searching on the web. It's all the centralized experience. And I think, then there's a synthesis, which is like, well, maybe there's the synthesis, which is like the fact that there are the opportunities for these new companies to even exist. So with each synthesis, then that becomes a new thesis. So with the thesis of centralized power, what is the antithesis of the decentralized powers. And so from that point, it's basically like you have to create a market demand in order to change Facebook's strategy. So there has to be people that start to make different decisions as to what technology they're deciding to use and adapt. Do you go and have a centralized experience at Sansar, or do you start to build and do all the labor to be able to build a decentralized vision of something like High Fidelity is creating? Do you believe in that vision well enough? So obviously you are here in Sansar in Second Life. So there's something that you have decided that you very much appreciate the centralized experience of like the user experience is so much better, and you have the community here and network, but yet there are decentralized networks that are being built, and the experience is not as good, but the potential in 5 to 10 years has much more revolutionary impact.
I completely hear what you're saying, and now we can talk about this for 3 or more hours. you laid this out really well. I'm just very skeptical because High Fidelity is still owned by a company.
That's true. That's true.
That runs it. It's still a company that controls the currency by giving it out. Actually, I have a whole bunch of High Fidelity money in there. I haven't gotten out of the bank yet. So this is equally, I'm not a fan of any of these systems. In my ideal world, if I could create the ideal world, this would all be sort of a co-op type situation, also in terms of content creation, right? So there was actually a little bit of friction. Go ahead.
I don't know if that works. So I don't know if that's gonna just to throw out there, there's a fourth option, which is WebVR, which is going to be coming out this year, which is going to be completely open and not owned by anybody. So that doesn't even have a social. I mean, there are social VR plugins for that, but I don't agree that. I mean, I think that there's some like grants that are given by governments to be able to support the arts. But supporting the arts is something that's like either you have to go all in and create something that's for the market and you are creating a business out of it, or like for me, I have a Patreon. So patreon.com, Voices of VR, you could, as people who have extra access to money and resources, they can give me and fund me to be able to be a creator and a maker. And I have a salary that enables me to do that. So I do think that in the future, there's going to be the continuation of these big AAA games that are at an economy of scale that they can actually survive as a business. And there's going to be a lot more makers and creators that have maybe a smaller niche audience, but that are relying upon donations from people in order to actually do the work that they want to do. And I see, and right now Patreon is a centralized solution for that. And I think that eventually that's going to be embedded within the fabric of how the internet works, I hope, so that there's going to be a way that you can actually support people in that way. So
and now we're entering the political debate, which is awesome because I see actually a third option. Right now I'm in Germany where I am supported by a wonderful insurance, which is the artist insurance, which is paid by the government. So I'm creating art or design or whatever, and I get full health insurance for me and my family. How is that financed? It's financed by something that a lot of people don't like to do, which is pay taxes. In a functioning society, you need a tax base, and there is no way around it. There is no solution. I like Patreon a lot. I like the idea. What I don't like about it, and I haven't looked into it deep enough, it's completely legit that a service charges money or gets a little bit off the top end when they provide that service. So I have nothing against that. But a lot of now we're completely veering off the topic of VR, although it is related. What I'm worried about is again old power structures where a small group of elite or companies are really kind of directing how we all sort of behave on their private playgrounds. And in that sense, I'm a much bigger fan of a more open, distributed solution. And what you're saying about WebVR, I hope Tony Parisi will come on soon. He's a big advocate.
Oh, he's actually he's at Unity now, so
yeah, he might not be able to talk about WebVR again. But WebVR for me always had the biggest potential, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I actually did an interview with Tony back at the very first SVVR, and I've been covering WebVR. And actually, my interview today that I just launched, number 628, is with Tony talking about Unity and WebVR in the future. I do think they're going to have some integration to be able to export from Unity onto the web, but it's not sort of finished yet. So I do think that's actually going to be a huge catalyst to WebVR once it actually finally launches. But I mean, you're right. Having government support is something that in the political climate of the United States, not a lot of artists artists can really rely upon that, especially with the cutting of the endowment for the arts here as well.
That's
so
why you guys got to make the government. I mean, I love my adopted country, where half of my family is sort of can be, and and where I could be arrested and deported if I steal a pack of cigarettes. Good thing I don't smoke anymore. Sorry, that's an aside. Uh, we're approaching the top of the hour. I think we can make this society, Kent, if people are remain idealistic and realize that we are the ones who can drive this bus. At the top of the hour, we gotta meet the fans. I have Arthur Gillard here.
Let me say one thing here,
Yeah,
which is just that I do see that virtual reality is an opportunity to be able to actually prototype a lot of these worlds and societies that are completely in a virtual realm before we actually go and live them. And so you have the opportunity to build these worlds and these societies and these cultures and to see how they actually work using all these sort of decentralized systems, cryptocurrencies, and structures of architectures of reality that can actually like create the culture that you want to see in the world. And so, that's a lot of what I've been sort of tracking on the Voices of VR, which is just like, what is the ultimate potential of all of this? And I think at the end of the day, it's like, what does it mean to be human? How are we more connected to ourselves? How are we more connected to each other? And how are we more connected to like all of the cosmos and the world so that we can actually have the world that we actually want to live in?
Right. And that creates another, and I also have not solved that, because you could argue that technology is bridging the digital divide. But I just had this conversation with my wife yesterday. Everybody has and it's been pointed out in very smart articles and by deeper thinkers than I can ever be, is that the fact that we all have a smartphone in our hands does not mean that we all use it the same way, because you need to be kind of growing up. And oh my God, there's a guy coming in behind you. What's that? What's happening?
What's up, Drax?
Hello, Ebbe. I'm so sorry for delayed. How do you always come here?
Hey, Kent. Awesome. All right.
Kent looks like awesome. Kent, right?
Yeah, almost. You tried.
We were joking. Yeah. I think you guys need to have this avatar with the glasses as the Kent signature model in the carousel.
What's up? You guys been chatting for a while?
Oh yeah, super interesting.
Awesome.
Going back and forth. Kent, now you can ask Ebbe, or Ebbe, you can ask Kent, and I'm just gonna sit back and.
I just came from an internal meeting over another place in Sansar. I had a business development meeting in Sansar, and now I got to run in a few minutes to a Second Life meeting. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, it's cooking.
Well, then I will ask you one question: is Second Life obsolete just because everybody is?
God damn it, Drax! Stop it with this silliness. Of course not. Team is investing and making Second Life better every single day, and Second Life is better than ever, and we're going to continue to make it better and better. I mean, so we have two products.
I completely agree with you 1,000%, because I was pushing Kent. I mean, Kent and I actually agree on that more than I think we both realize, is that some people actually enjoy a mediated experience and they don't want to be in a headset all day long.
Well, I mean, Second Life just has so much going on, and it will, even for anyone to try and accomplish what Second Life is doing every single day would be really difficult. So Sansar is not trying to become everything Second Life is, and VR and. So these two groups are basically, marching to in their own directions. Unfortunately, it would have been cool if we could have made Second Life VR compatible, but Second Life just wasn't built that way. Yep. So we're giving that a shot with Sansar.
Cool.
Kent, you have 1 minute with the boss here. What are you going to ask him?
Well, what are the biggest problems that you're trying to solve right now?
With Sansar? With Sansar, huge effort around performance, loading of scenes or experiences. Avatar IK and the Avatar look is still kind of raggedy. We're sort of getting there where you can but we want sort of proper full body IK, so a lot more work going in that area. Yeah,
Oh my
you
God.
flow. You flow pretty well.
But Epic,
And,
I gotta tell you, this is so good. I mean, if you watch this later, like the conversation with Kent, he's so expressive with his arms. It is unbelievable. He's standing right there in the light. I mean,
yeah,
who
with
knows?
with body language and facial expression, the yeah, exactly. So I mean, the sense of presence you get instantly from that is just a huge jump, and then interactivity. Making it easier for people to create more interactive content, whether it's just coming in here and turn the lights on, or playing games and stuff like that. So a lot of effort around making more interactive content, making it easier for people like Galen to make, hover derbies, etc.
Yeah, and then Kent could put down that pop filter, which is annoying him because it's too high.
I can't move my pop filter over.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if Drax wants you to mess with his stuff.
No.
Like, I'm gonna take your book and throw it.
Exactly. That's what that's here for. Yeah.
Yeah. Read this instead. What is this? Well, here's another thing we have to fix. When you do this, you can just tell that we're actually round tripping physics through the server. So it's server authoritative right now. So we're in the process of changing that to client side authoritative for the things you do, because and as soon as we do that, we'll be able to get rid of these silly blue hands and actually see your actual avatar in first person. Because right now, your actual avatar is behind. The blue hands are actually following the controllers exactly, whereas your actual avatar hands are round tripping through the server. And so we're going to fix that. And then you'll have a first person sort of identity. So, lots of obvious stuff.
Right. Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for stopping by. It's good to see you in the Sansar, and I'll have to come to one of the Saturday world hoppings, Atlas hoppings. Yeah.
I hope to see you tomorrow. I'll be there.
Oh, and tomorrow we're gonna get a little teaser. Tomorrow, Strawberry and I are going to, and we tested this, we practiced it. We want to create a world out of a template and free stuff in less than 10 minutes, probably 5 minutes or so. So Strawberry and I tested sort of the whole flow, and it's gonna be pretty cool, I think. Yep.
All right.
People can watch that. Awesome.
Well, are we going to on the stream what you guys created?
Yeah.
So what do we in world do while you do that?
You just twiddle your blue thumbs, I guess.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. That is some serious yoga move there. Yeah. Well, it seems like this release we did yesterday didn't break too much. Actually, I think performance has improved.
The performance is absolutely improved. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're making good ground. It's going faster and faster now. So much of the first several years was just so much of the fundamentals: cloud infrastructure, rendering engine, physics engines, character systems, scripting infrastructure, security, this, blah, blah, blah. Now we can start to really, it's kind of like, the skyscrapers in San Francisco. You have this huge hole in the ground for 5 years. Yeah. And then suddenly, the floors go on top of it. And I feel like we're just starting to get out of that hole and can start putting the stories on top that where users will notice, like, interesting progress from release to release. So, now, fun times.
Kent is writing a book called The Ultimate Potential of VR. Ebbe, in a very short answer before you go to your meeting, what do you think is the ultimate potential of VR?
I personally believe VR can replace, augment almost everything we do in physical space. Mm-hmm. And, I'm still going to want to spend a lot of quality time in physical space. There's some things you can do there, like there's some degrees of human contact, and, eating and drinking is nice features in the physical world. But otherwise, VR enables pretty much everything we do to happen that we normally take for granted we do in physical space. So, art, entertainment, music, shopping, education, training, it's going to impact, how we live our lives. And for a lot of people already, we've learned from Second Life, it creates a radical improvement of their existing lives. Yeah. And in the future with VR, I think it'll be easier for a broader audience to sort of find that instant sort of value that they can get out of it, because you're just instantly present. You don't have to sort of imagining presence. It's real.
If you can be your avatar, and as you know, I mean, I'm a big advocate of the disabled community, broadly speaking, which is internally incredibly diverse, and they have all sorts of different needs, and it's fascinating to see a bunch of people from the Second Life documentary that is coming out in April, really also getting into Sansar, because, and congratulations to you guys to making the desktop experience really good, because we were talking about earlier, Kent and I, that right now it's a little bit sort of a two-class system. You know, people are like, oh, you have VR, you're like better, and I'm lesser. But the fact that we at Atlas Hopping we can mingle together, people with headsets and without, kind of seamlessly, except for maybe the text interaction, is great work. I mean, I think that is really important, because it plays to the inclusiveness
Yeah.
of the.
It creates challenges, though, because there's a lot of things we have to sort of kind of do in duplicate.
But you will never have, for the foreseeable time, I mean, that will be my prediction, you will not have 100%, VR set, I think, throughput, or whatever the term would be.
I mean, pure VR only?
Yeah. I mean, from the consumer standpoint, because I think people will want to have difference in experience. I mean, I hear this all the time. It's just anecdotally, people that I talk to, that's one thing. It's going to be it depends on the application, the situation in the moment. I'm home, or maybe I'm in a hotel room, or hang out with people in Sansar. I'm not going to bring my headset on a trip, stuff like that. But maybe the headset.
Yeah, I think ultimately you should be able to connect to these worlds in various ways. On my mobile phone, maybe I don't hang out in the world, but I still want to be connected with my communities, with my customers, with my friends, family, whatever, students, whatever it might be. So, but it's one of those things where we're going to have to decide how to prioritize, but trying to solve for VR, PC, mobile, all in one, where the user experience sort of is seamless for all of those. Plus, we already kind of have to be so many different companies all in one, right? Mm-hmm. Monetization systems and content creation systems, and like several things you have in Second Life and Sansar. Yeah, several things you have in Second Life and Sansar are like their entire huge companies doing one aspect of those things. So how thin can we spread ourselves before it's sort of, you don't have anything. So you have to choose. So we'll definitely, now that we have a lot of fundamentals in place, that we have a lot of VR focus going forward. And so maybe desktop will be slightly left behind with that focus. But we also know there are a lot of times when you want to be able to go back and forth. A lot of content creation is still easier on a PC than it is on VR. So, and still some text chat is easier. You can go extreme and you just throw text chat out the window. Let's not do it and do 100% voice, and then you exclude all kinds of use cases.
A lot of people, and again, it's not only disabled folks who cannot use text or who cannot hear, but
I know.
Also people who choose maybe to communicate in different ways for whatever the reason is. I mean that.
Yeah.
I think the
but if you try to be inclusive to everybody, then there's the risk that you become nothing special to anybody, and you get watered down because you're trying to do too many things. So that's the challenge we have to sort out as we go forward. But so far it's great fun.
So far it's a good job. I mean, I told Kent earlier that the National Science Foundation, which funded our Digital Selves project with Tom Birchfield and Donna Davis, they had money for headsets, and they sent out headsets to some of the disabled protagonists, and a lot of them said, well, I can't use it. It's, I'm my physical disability doesn't let me do it. But these are smaller groups of people, but nonetheless. Anyways, I'm going off a tangent. We're at the top of the hour.
I got to run.
You got to run?
Kent, great to see you again.
Yeah,
and
I
hope to bump into you soon again. Let's hopefully tomorrow. If not tomorrow, don't be a stranger. Pop in.
Okay.
Let me see if I can add you as a friend. I know that feature is maybe broken in VR. I've clicked the button, but I'm not sure if you're going to get the request.
Actually,
I think
that too.
I'm suspicious. Drax
I
and
don't-
I are already friends.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope to see you soon. Cheers,
Okay,
guys.
sounds good. Yeah, see you.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, and I didn't take the opportunity to unfriend him. Damn it! Okay. Is he still here? So, wonderful. It's the top of the hour. If you like, if you are still up for it, we could go to Harvest.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, did we finish the pod? Did you come up with a good rap for the podcast?
I
for the
probably
recording?
record an outro, but let's
Okay.
do a last word on
What I think the ultimate potential is?
right, exactly. Wait, but not only the ultimate potential, but also the ultimate threat. And I know, we have a plethora of, and I read like a crazy person, so I have probably read every dystopian novel that there is, and and some people actually say the problem with dystopian stuff, which is really so cool and enticing and entertaining, is that we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot as a human race because we can't even imagine a positive future. There's a great book out in New York, 2140, which starts with a big catastrophe but ends on a very positive. That will be an exception it's a decidedly utopian novel. But long story short, Kent, tell us the ultimate potential, but then also the ultimate dystopian scenario.
Well, I'm going to start with the threat because I want to end on the potential because that's just how I am. So I think that actually the biggest threat is that virtual reality starts to gather so much information about our biometric data and that companies that are centralized start to record and document so much of our unconscious data. So whether that's our eye tracking, our biometric data, our heart rate variability, our galvanic skin response, our brain waves, so that eventually...
Hold on, Kent, I need to interrupt you. Alexa, is Kent telling the truth? No, he's a government agent. Okay, Alexa, thank you. No, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So,
No, you're absolutely right. But my point is, like, we're already kind of there, and people kind of embrace things like Alexa. It's a cool technology, but it's I'm terrified about that.
Yeah. Well, so the threat. So taking up all this biometric data is going to eventually kind of like give these companies power to be able to understand us better than we understand ourselves. And then the line between advertising and thought control is going to completely dissolve, and that they're going to be potentially have the power to be able to shift large groups of people's even like fundamental core belief systems. And so I think that the threats of the power of centralized companies with centralized governments, there's a lot of abuse there for mind control that is just super scary. And I think that's a real threat and that we need to be paying attention to. Now, that doesn't mean that VR can't be like the best, like last bastion of privacy. If we see that face tracking and everything that we do in the world is being tracked, maybe VR will be the only place where we're not tracked to that same degree, and that we'll have cryptocurrency and or blockchain enabled things like self-sovereign identity, so that you could actually take control of your identity and not have everything being centralized into all these different companies. So I think that tension of centralization, decentralization is there, but it's also there for privacy. So that's the threat. Now, and there's all sorts of other things in terms of also like dissociation and sort of creating a society that people are more immersed and disconnected from themselves, disconnected from other people, and disconnected from reality.
And
that it
siloing
just
off into different belief systems, and there's no I mean, we see this.
So
yeah, go ahead.
So social VR is an opportunity for people to actually be more connected and more social, but there are threats of people just isolating in that way. So I think that's a threat for any technology. So any technology has the potential to make you, it's like the extreme polarities. And in some ways, the technology is neutral, and that it's kind of up to us for how we decide to use it and how other people decide to use it. And that we're kind of, this algorithmic reality of some of these social media companies can, change and impact the lives of billions of people based upon an algorithmic decision. And so that that's the threat of centralization. So what I would say the ultimate potential of VR is that it can make us more connected to ourselves, more connected to each other, and more connected to the earth and the larger cosmos. And so like I see that, and talking to over 800 people, VR has applications from everything from entertainment to being able to connect to your home and family more, or communicate with people, to have friends and to cultivate new friendships, or to do things that are involved with your career, or to deal with if you are disabled or immobilized in some ways, to give you access to different experiences. It gives us new ways of express our identity and to be able to connect more to ourselves, being able to have like virtual resources that, are able to kind of replace the feeling of ownership, but just having access to the experience of different objects, as well as like medicine and being able to do all sorts of things with healing, being able to change our relationships to our romantic interests, our business partnerships, how we deal with grief and death, and finally just how we deal with like our spirituality, being able to commune with each other, explore philosophical ideas, have higher education, as well as primary education. So for me, I see all of these. Let me just finish. Just all these different.
Go ahead. Sorry.
All these different domains of human experience, and that like these are things that VR are going to impact, and these are all the same things that AI is going to impact as well. Is that you have all these different domains that these technologies is just a part of the human experience, and that I sort of look at computing technology is the equivalent of the Gutenberg press. Just as the Gutenberg press was able to democratize access to information and knowledge in a way, computing technologies through artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality are democratizing the access to experience, interactive, participatory, embodied experiences in a completely new way. And at the end of the day, it's going to make us more connected to ourselves, more connected to each other, and more connected to the planet and the rest of the universe.
That's a wonderful idealistic vision, and I applaud you for it. And I'm not a cynic, but I sometimes feel I'm a little bit disillusioned because what you just described, what you said, I could have written this down when I discovered Second Life in 2007. And I'm a little disillusioned because what I found over the years is that the biggest problem of this extremely promising concept of Second Life actually turned out that people do tend to not take advantage of the opportunity to create a diverse society and actually go out, proactively in order to learn from the other person and sort of broaden their horizon and maybe, question one's own privilege. But it seems to me that most people, and again, I'm not a cynic, and this is a complex question where this comes from and why this is, but people do tend to stay within their tribe, and they organize along these tribal lines, which is a little bit depressing. Or like my former neighbor in California used to say, "Okay, Drax, good morning. You know what? I figured out I'm a racist." And I go, "What? Okay, she's 85, and I said, let's slow down. How did you come to this conclusion?" "Well, I just think the Italians should stay with the Italians, and black people should stay with black people. Good morning." And so, anyways, now, thank you, Kent. I want to ask one question here. Arthur Gillen.
I feel like I need to respond to that a little bit. Just like, because, so I think that Marilyn Schlitz, one of the things she said to me is that one of the skills that we need to be able to learn in the 21st century is how to deal with paradox and how to deal with inconsistencies. Yeah. And I think with the increased polarization in our world, we have the situation where you have these different polarized communities, and that it is our tendency to surround ourselves with people who completely agree with our worldview, and that you have this, tendency of a gathering of people who agree with each other. And I think that being able to deal with disagreements and being able to navigate how things may be unconscious and pattern behaviors of how we're relating to the world, that is like the challenge of our society right now. Is how do we actually create like the incentives or a mechanism by which we can actually overcome some of those either unconscious biases or that tendency to only interact with people who agree with you. And so I think that in the future, we're going to be looking at some of these deeper underlying metaphysical and philosophical assumptions about where some of these splits and breaks are coming off. And that I hope that it's going to be a combination of being able to actually have deep, intense discussions about those, but also just just having the direct embodied experience of what it feels like to be able to relate, interact with people who are different from you. And I think it's from those direct experiences that are actually some of the most powerful ways to overcome some of these things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Jeremy Balanson was here, did great research. Mel Slater. I mean, I'm going to link it on the blog. Tons of research along those lines, promising stuff. Good stuff, and absolutely, that is the potential. Let's leave it there. Arthur Gillard on the YouTube stream, I did promise him to ask a question. He has a question for you. Do you know of any commercially available VR games that incorporate biofeedback, either available or on the way? The only one that he knows of is Nevermind by Flying Mollusk.
There is some more stuff that has come out from a developer named Sarah Hill. They do Story Up, but they do the biometric feedback to be able to integrate with some of the, like a meditation app to be able to like tie in some meditation and some of the Gear VR. I don't remember the exact name of it. I did do an interview with her at Oculus Connect 4 talking about it, and it is now available. So, but some of these experiences that, and I think that also, yeah, I think that's the one that comes to mind. I think there's been some other ones that are out there as well, but that's one to check out for sure if you're looking for an experience that integrates biofeedback that's out there today. But you will need to get some of the extra technology that will read your brainwaves in that way. So. And
okay, cool. And the last dispute on the YouTube channel is that my friend Daisy says utopian novels are boring. That's the problem. And Arthur says no, they're actually really awesome and exciting. How can we build a better world? There's this book, New York 2140 by Kim Stanley Robinson. I think it is good, but it is also really, and I read really big, thick books, but this book is very wordy, and I don't know, it's not a good example. I
think we need dystopian futures to be able to give us the story of how things can go wrong. So they're cautionary tales, and that's important.
Yeah.
But I think it's almost like it's a difference between being a critic and a maker. If you're a critic, you're going to critique the existing systems and kind of take it to the logical extreme, and that's the essence of dystopia.
Yeah.
And then if you're a maker, if you want to actually build new systems and structures of society, that's a different sort of tool set of actually creating something and sort of projecting how that the evolution of that thing that you create is going to sort of change the society to sort of be a much better world. And I think that is a harder thing to do, is to be a maker and to create the utopian societies that you actually want to create in. And it doesn't mean that there's no conflict in there. It just means that we're able to address some of the fundamental issues and problems. And I think that with both virtual and augmented reality, it's able to do an entire world building. And so whereas like the dystopia actually creates the dramatic tension of the story and the drama that is built within the context of the world, you have to think about story and drama in a different way. When you don't have that same level of tension in the world, you have to think about the human dynamics that are new possible within the utopian vision. So I think it's actually easier to tell a dystopian story than it is to create a utopian story and to still find out where that conflict is in a world that has a system that works for people. But yet the human psyche and dynamics is always going to have conflict. So what does a story look like in that realm?
Completely agree. It's actually a lack of imagination. If we it requires much more imagination to really imagine something, rather than doling out the same old sort of Matrix scenario of what VR is going to do to humanity. We need to walk and chew gum at the same time. Okay, Arthur and Daisy are now fighting on YouTube over New York 2140, if it's boring, if it's shit, or if it's good. So I'm proposing a new show, Dragster Reads, where we're gonna have two people who I know we're gonna look at books. So we got the Drax Reading Club. Okay, I'm gonna go into VR now because I had it on my head, and now we're gonna go briefly a little tour, folks. Yeah, I was cheating. I had it on my head now here. But Kent, this looked really, really good.
Okay.
Yeah. This book, by the way, here is the Sleep.
Are we streaming still, or is it stopped streaming?
We're still streaming, so we got to be very careful. Because...
So we have to tell people where to go if they want to come. If they go to 114 Harvest, and we're going to go there now, right?
Right.
So if you're in
114 Harvest, if you go to atlas.sansar.com, or if you go into Sansar, you just type in 114 and search, and it comes up.
Okay.